On today's episode, we are joined by our good friend, fellow podcast host, and kayak fishing hammer, Bailey Eigbrett. And we specifically have Bailey on to help us out and give us some key tips for serious kayak anglers. So, to all my fellow members of the Rubbermaid Regatta, my plastic and polyethylene pals, and my pedal pirates out there, this episode is for you. All that and more coming at you on this episode of Tackle Talk.
Hello, everybody. I'm Bill Dance, and you're listening to Tackle Talk.
This is the Tackle Talk Podcast, brought to you by American Legacy Fishing and Outdoors, Mossy Oak, and Dakota Lithium.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Tackle Talk Podcast, which we will get to in just a second. But first, we are brought to you in part by American Legacy Fishing and Outdoors. American Legacy Fishing is a great Midwestern-owned company right there in southern Indiana that carries a great selection of rods, reels, baits, line, apparel, anything that you can need for your fishing adventures. But the best part, not only do they have a great selection of new gear, they have the internet's best selection of high-quality, lightly used gear as well. So from your favorite brands, Shimano, G. Loomis, Dobbins, 13, Abu Garcia, Lew's, Fenwick, and more. Not only can you find those products brand new, but you can find them very, very lightly used to save even more money. They also have a price match guarantee on the website. They have a great American Legacy Elite program to save you even more money, 10% back on every single order, free shipping with no minimums, and so much more. All of that and more over at www.americanlegacyfishing.com. And as always, use code TACKLETALK10. That will save you 10% off almost everything on the website. Some exclusions apply, but not many. Almost everything, 10% off with code TACKLETALK10 over at www.americanlegacyfishing.com. All right, everybody. Today, we are joined by not just a guest, but an actual friend, someone that I would call one of my buddies, someone that we can be a little bit more informal with than most guests, and that is, of course, our friend, Bailey Eigbrett. So most of you probably know Bailey already. He hosts another great podcast that I've told you multiple times over the years to check out. That would be Serious Angler, where similar to us, Bailey and his team over there have bootstrapped a great fishing show that covers a wide variety of topics and has some terrific guests. So in addition to that, though, he also has the Serious Angler Network, which includes 3 other shows right now: Business from the Bass Boat, The Lure Lab, and Kayak Fishing Weekly. But then in addition to building a great brand and a great show and a great audience for his media side of things, Bailey has also proven himself to be a force to be reckoned with on the kayak fishing circuits, including the Hobie BOS and the Bassmaster Kayak Series. So, since we're having Bailey on the episode, it only seemed fitting to ask him for some down and dirty top kayak fishing tips for, wait for it, serious anglers. So that's what we get into today, some top tips for kayak anglers. And it's interesting to hear each of our tips. I brought 5 and Bailey brought 5, and I gave him no other instructions but that. So this was very open-ended, and I think you get to see our personalities a little bit and how our brains work just by the type of tips that we picked. Bailey's seemed to be a lot more big picture and a lot more great all-around tips that I probably should have thought of, and I'm much more of like a narrow, specific situation, small detail kind of guy. So I really enjoyed this episode, recording it with Bailey. Obviously, it's fun to get to record with your friends. I hope you guys enjoy this as much as we did. Let's jump right into our top kayak fishing tips with Bailey Eigbrett. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are joined today by a guy that I'm proud to call a good friend. He's a kayak hammer, host of the Serious Angler podcast, our buddy, Mr. Bailey Eigbrett. Bailey, thank you so much for swinging by today.
What's up, man? It's good to be here.
Yeah, this is it's embarrassing how long it's been since you've been on our show. I'm embarrassed that it's been probably, 3-4 years probably.
I don't know, man. I feel like it's a mistake getting me back on the show. I feel like it's the opposite. I think
well, the good news is, unlike yours, mine isn't live, so I can clip out anything that goes crazy.
You just delete the show.
Yeah. But obviously today we're going to do some kayak fishing talk here. We're going to have 10 tips. I have 5. You have 5 for anybody who I would quote unquote call a serious angler in the kayak world. So I think that's going to be good. But before we do that, obviously I'd say at least half the people listening have to know who you are, either from Serious Angler from your YouTube channel be the fish, from your tournament endeavors, or some combination of the three. But specifically, I want to start with the Serious Angler and the actual podcast itself. So for those of you that don't know, Bailey hosts a great podcast called Serious Angler. Deacon, Andy, all those guys over there, you guys do a really good job. But I think it's cool, and it's similar in regards to our show, where it's a show by regular dudes for regular anglers. You're not one of those, 100 pro anglers that started their own podcast for 3 episodes and then quit. Like, it's stuff for people like us. So I know we've been friends for a long time. I don't know if I've actually got the story of how Serious Angler started. So when did you go down that road and decided you want to kind of dive into sort of like, I guess, the quote unquote media side of fishing?
Yeah. So it started like it honestly started the month before COVID. The summer before COVID started. I had taken an internship to complete my master's degree. And in doing so, I had to go do 6 months at the University of Notre Dame athletic department, which, now that it's over, it was awesome. But during it was 90-hour weeks for no pay. So it kind of sucked because I couldn't go fishing or anything like that. And so the month leading up to that internship, I had helped out a buddy who'd gotten me into podcasting in regard to like listen to Joe Rogan, things like that. And I was helping him build houses and stuff in the summer. And, I was talking to him while I was at this internship. I'm like, dude, it sucks. Like, I can't fish at all. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. And he's just like, he's like, out of the blue, he's like, you should start a podcast, dude. And I'm like, what do you mean? I'm like, I don't even have time to begin with. He's just like, you complain you can't get in the water and go learn. Like, podcasting is a great way to get people on and learn. It's not a bad idea. And I kind of brewed on it for a little bit, and I said, screw it. Like, just started a thing called, I had no idea the name. It's Ryan Killen is the guy that got me into it all. And he's like, dude, just call it Serious Angler. So he came up with the name. He came up with it all. So all the credit goes to him. He's just like, you should just start it. And so just kind of just let it rip. And I get the notification, and it's coming up here, I think, honestly, in like a week. I should remember the date, but I don't. But I think it's 5-year anniversary of the first video I put out, and I look like a freaking baby face, like just turd, horrible audio. Like, you look back on it now and you're like, oh my gosh, it's horrible. But I use that as a means to just get people on and learn about bass fishing. In the meantime, there was no like some weeks had 4 episodes, some weeks had 0. Like, there was no cadence whatsoever. But yeah, my buddy got me into it. And then that was like the thing that it sparked during COVID. Just, all I had was time, because, getting out of college with COVID right there was horrible. Because there was literally no one was hiring. No one was nothing. Well, might as well go fish and do a bunch of podcasts, and kind of just took off from there, man. And we, like you say, we're a bunch of fish heads, avid bass anglers, but we're also a bunch of idiots. And so we can kind of resonate in that perspective. But that's really where the train started, man. And now it's, the goal is we're trying to turn this thing into a dynasty.
Do you ever go back and listen to your first couple episodes? I get that. Like, no. People will message and say, hey, I found it and I started from episode 1, and I just cringe when people say they started from the beginning. I'm like, oh no, they're listening to like the worst of the worst that we've ever put out. Or like every once in a while when I fire up my iPhone or whatever, for some reason it goes to like this audio clip of the first episode that I put out. I guess it's in my music or something that I don't know how to delete. So every time I turn on my AirPods or something, I hear the intro to the first episode we ever did. And every time I just like want to curl up in a ball and be like, this is awful.
Yeah, dude, I do not go back. It was 2 years ago. I made a post of like, 3 years ago today, whatever, started the whole throwback post. And that is the only thing that I do that I see, because every year I just repost it as like, cool to see another year down in the books, but I never go back and listen. And I tell people, you think our show's bad now, you can go back to the original episodes if you want and see how bad it was then.
Yeah, it's kind of the same thing. I'll just be like, I really like the conversations I had, but just like audio quality is not what I wanted it to be, especially, and things like that. And you're like, I'm getting kind of spoiled now, where now we sort of got it dialed, kind of like you do, where you've got your way of doing things and it fits well and it flows well and stuff. But back then you were just flying by the seat of your pants, and there were giant 100%. Awkward pauses and weird questions that you asked, and you're just like, where was I going with this? Yeah,
dude. Yeah, I mean, now I don't know if we got it dialed, but at least we have a process that somewhat works sometimes. And dude, I don't know my life without it, to be quite honest. Like, it's the reason I have my job in the industry. It's the reason I have some great friendships like you and I. I don't think you and I would have likely met if it wasn't for the podcast. And it was actually funny. The guy that I was staying with at a house off campus for Notre Dame, never met in my life. We moved in the same day, random strangers lived in the house together, and he became an angler because of listening to me do the podcast. So that was kind of cool. But yeah, man, dude, I don't know where I'd be without the podcast now. I make some great, friendships from it. And it's a grind, but it's fun.
Oh yeah. Well, and you've obviously also had what I think is like probably the biggest collection of especially pro anglers, like of any show out there. You seem like you've talked to every single pro that's stepped foot in a boat in the past 5 years, which is awesome. It's a great collection of conversations you put together. But what's been the best part of the past 4 or 5 years of doing that show?
I mean, the cliche answer would be and it's true, but all the DMs and the responses you get from people that you're actually helping go out and catch a bass, like I took my son out fishing and he caught a fish, whatever, now we're hooked type of deal. That stuff obviously makes my day. But honestly, man, I like to hear, I'm a big guy. I'm a big fan of like the unsung heroes, the people that, like there's other shows, and rightfully so, they get on the winners of everything and the big names all the time and things like that. And those are amazing. I love those. But there's guys that, are always in, say, the top 10 or top 20 that never get any sort of recognition. And I love getting those guys on, hearing their stories, because, bass fishing is the one unique sport, especially tournament wise, where it's, the pros, we have immediate access to them if we want to. It's not like the NBA where you can go and call up LeBron James and be like, hey, you want to be on my podcast tomorrow morning? Like it's nothing like that. So I think with this one, it's cool. They're just average Joes, just like us. They got the bug. And then from there, man, I love you being able to use our platform now to help these guys and other anglers have their voice heard, their stories heard. And even in talking with some, like, we're part of the reason why some of them are getting sponsorship dollars, because they've been on our podcast throughout the years. Like, that part, while it plays a little role, it makes me feel awesome because they're able to live out the dream. But I mean, outside of the tournament, that's one thing in full honesty, I've been trying to actually steer a little bit away from tournaments on the show recently, and talk about, the other 95% of fishing that occurs that isn't tournament based, and the people that resonate there. Like, we've gotten on, Mikey Balls, who isn't really a tournament guy, but he's a YouTuber, and
he's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. He's a legend. And
one of the OG YouTubers before everybody was a YouTuber.
Before Guggen, before all of that, Mikey was the OG and is one hell of a teacher. And guys like that are just regional hammers, or like guides that are out in Michigan that no one's known of, but they get them on. Dude, here's a great example. His name's Keith Tuma. Keith Tuma and then Matt Thompson. Keith Tuma, when we first had him on, nobody knew who the heck he was. He had never even gone to the Opens yet, never gone to the Classic. He was just this Minnesota hammer that was taking everybody's money. But he was one of the most energetic, friendliest people I've ever met. Get him on, and everyone asks when Tuma's coming back on the show. So it's cool, to see these guys like him and Matt Thompson, who was a freaking muskie angler that just started bass fishing and won big bass in every single local tournament in a year span. So it was cool to get on it, thought process, and hearing these guys, and they're like, dude, that was one of the funniest shows you've ever done with Matt Thompson. So it's cool to see these guys that may have not have had a big name, prior to it, and they see all this recognition from the show. And long-winded answer, man. I like to see the positive come out of it in the world right now that is so focused on negative.
I also think it's really fun because we get to have conversations with people that probably don't feel the way you feel about certain things. Like, fishing is one of those things, there's never a right or wrong answer to anything. So you can ask 5 different anglers, 10 different anglers, biologists, whatever a question, you get all these different answers. And that's what I love. I love people that disagree with me on certain things, because then I get to hear why they think a certain way. So if I think it's ridiculous that you throw, Rick Clunn's a great example. We had Rick Clunn on a long time ago, and he was like, yeah, I throw a popper on a 7-foot heavy, fast action casting rod. That's a frog rod. Why are you throwing a popper on a frog rod? But Rick Clunn likes to throw poppers on super heavy casting gear. So it's why? I want to learn why you do that. I'm not going to argue with you. I'm not going to tell you it's wrong. I throw it on a medium spinning rod, but why do you like that? Right. Okay. So, and then you get to pick their brain on that. I like that. I like hearing different perspectives on a topic where there never is a right or wrong answer.
Well, and the majority of them, which is a rarity nowadays, can take not the you're wrong, but the opposing viewpoint and not get offended by it. Like,
right.
You and I, how many times have I made fun of you for using snaps? And
And guess what? I have 2 rods behind me. Guess what's on both of them? I don't care what you say. I've got snaps on both of them. Well, the last question I have on the probably, or at least one of them for the podcast here, this is a little bit more of a personal one. I want to know how you feel about this because I know how I feel about it. So nowadays, like, it seems like podcasts are popping up all over the place. Everybody starts a podcast. They're everywhere, even in fishing, right? They pop up every single day. But these podcasts are popping up with like $20,000 sets and multi-camera angles and, you know, expensive camera gear and staff and some shiplap background that looks like it took 2 years to make and a custom desk and everything. Do you ever get discouraged by that? Like watching people pop up and being like, dude, I've been at this for 4 or 5 years. I really like my content, but dude, I can't compete with that. I'm a dude that's sitting right now. I have one microphone, a laptop, and a $20 LED light from Amazon that I bought that's shining on the wall behind me, if you could see. So like, that's what we're dealing with. Do you ever have that trouble of like trying to, I don't know, compare yourself to all of these other shows that keep popping up?
In the beginning, I think so. But I think as I've matured a little bit and tried to take a different perspective, like I've always tried to force myself, you know, and this is credit to my parents for the upbringing, just try not to be the person that looks at it from a jealousy standpoint, but put yourself in their shoes and more of a respect and admiration. Like I've told you, some of the stuff you come up with idea wise, I'm like, damn, I wish I came up with that. And it's more of, I wouldn't say a jealousy. I mean, there's definitely a part of me that's like, damn, I wish I did that instead of, you know, I wish I had that idea. It's more of, I guess, an admiration. I use that as, I guess, an inspiration to try to think more outside the box, things like that. I mean, there's definitely times where I'm sitting there, I'm like, I see Scott Martin starting a podcast and I'm sitting there like, damn, like, you know, because there's so many people that are going to tune into that thing now. And but at the end of the day, like, yeah, he's got a cool setup. He's got, you know, all the gear and everything because he's Scott Martin, but he's worked for that. He's earned it. So I'm never going to discredit that. Like when the Zaldane started the build, I look at their setup. I'm like, God dang, that's sick. You know, and the camera work and different things, editing wise, I'm like, gosh, I wish we could do stuff like that. But also it's like, again, they earned it. They worked their way towards it. I think it's just, you know, I try not to look at it from that perspective. Like I look at myself, like we were talking about earlier, episode 1, I'm in a random freaking apartment in Notre Dame and I'm going off a Zoom on a 30-year-old laptop that you could barely even see my face. And we've worked our way up to a decent mic. You know, we got a soundboard and a MacBook now. So like we're making strides. I think it's just, you got to be persistent with it. And it's like, dude, I look at it the same way as I look at, you know, professional tournament fishing, where some people nowadays, there's the whole, like, just because their family has money, they try to discredit somebody's upbringing, or because their dad was a pro angler, they try to discredit their journey. Like everyone is completely different. Everyone's somebody's going to have an easier road. Somebody's going to have a harder road. And that's just the way it is. But the people that will stay consistent with it, you know, and try not to be in the bad light of things, you know, they'll rise with a good reputation and they'll get there eventually. But I think in regards to that, I don't let it discourage me, I should say. I think I more just try to use that stuff as inspiration and ideas for different things. Like, I mean, dude, I've told you straight up, and I sent you the text for it. Like the quote images you do, I thought were awesome. And we only started doing that because of you. So like that's a great example there. But I did text you to be like, hey, are you cool with me completely knocking you off right now?
But there's that, like, I didn't invent quote cards either. Yeah.
Right. But I think you were honestly the first media outlet to start doing that in the fishing space.
Yeah, but all that stuff, I mean, it's a good point too, just like not comparing yourself too hard to other people too. That's a good lesson for fishing in general. Like I talk to people all the time that send messages where they're like, dude, I'm out there, you know, everybody else seems like they're catching, I watch these YouTube videos and everybody's catching these fish. I can't do it that well. Like you're watching a highlight reel of these people. Yep. You can't compare yourself to someone else's Instagram feed or whatever and be like, dude, they're always on the tanks. It's like, no, around here, I might've put in 15, 16, 17 hours for that one fish sometimes. You just don't see the struggle part of it. All you see is the highlight reel. So it's a good lesson, I think, in general in fishing. It's just like, you know, it's so easy nowadays with the internet to just want to compare yourself to everybody and want to put yourself up to these standards, that sometimes false standards that you set for yourself based on what you think everybody else has or does or accomplishes. And it's like, it's just not a healthy thing to do sometimes. You just kind of have to do yourself. Not to say you can't take inspiration from those people. Like you said, right. I watch things that you do. I watch things that other shows do where you're like, that's a great idea. Like, I wonder if we can adapt that somehow and kind of have our own little spin on that. But you're always looking for best practices. You're always looking for something to push yourself to that next level. So speaking of, I think you do something that was a little bit ahead of the curve, and I want to kind of give you some flowers here on this one, is that the network side of things. So like having your podcast or a single show become a network, because now it's what it is. It's the Serious Angler Network, where you have multiple shows under one umbrella, I think was smart. And I've said for years, I think that's where podcasts are probably going at some point. When did you decide to do that? When did you decide to say, hey, one show, yes, we can handle that. Let's try 2, 3, 4 shows under this same umbrella?
Yeah, honestly, I think in the full credit, from our team wise, the idea sparked with Deacon of rebranding that and using that as a network. And who knows, man, I don't even know if Serious Angler Network is going to be the name, here in the next couple of years. We might even rebrand. But the idea of it and being able to put it all under one roof was an inspiration from Meat Eater. And so we were like, there's this great one that's out in the hunt side that, they have a little bit of fishing, but like they don't really get into it full bore. And we looked at it and, Paddle and Fin is the only other network that I know of on the fishing side. And we just really thought that we could take that and take it to a different level. And we have plans to do so for 25 that I'm really excited about. But it's, we just kind of took that as these things can cross promote each other. And there's ways that we can help have resources come in. And it's just one thing that we thought that would be really smart to do because it doesn't exist well in the fishing industry yet.
Correct.
And we don't think we're doing it well yet either, but we hope to eventually get to that stage. But that way it's, the teams working together in regards to the content structure and things like that. And then we can easily cross promote within each show. But then it allows it to be all under one thing that we can have, one angler goes and they see, they're on Apple Podcasts. They see the channel that's called Serious Angler Network. They click on it and maybe they're a serious bass angler that, sees, Lure Lab. I can see about techniques, and maybe they don't want to learn about the business side on Biz from the Bass Boat, but they also want to learn a little bit from, one of our guests on Serious Angler. They can see all that in one spot. And that I think just helps for people that are, tuning in, looking for that resource.
And I think it's smart because, like you said, you give those people an outlet for everything they want to see, where you do get the ability to be everything for everybody, which with one show is tough to do. Like, I know there are episodes I try and do that where it's like a little bit of everything. And I know there's episodes where some people love them and some people hate them. Like, some people love the gear review stuff. Some people love the pro angler stuff. Some people love the biology stuff, like whatever. And I know that there's certain episodes where people are going to tune in and be like, this probably isn't as much of what I wanted as like last week or the next week, because it's just a jumble of different stuff. Where with you, it's like, no, I like only techniques and lures. Okay, I can tune into the Lure Lab every week. I like the more well-rounded stuff. Okay, I got Serious Angler. I like the business side of things and the sponsor side of things and, the tournament trail behind the scenes sort of thing. So Deacon show's right up their alley. Kayak Fishing Weekly that you guys started is a great example of, again, a niche where you're giving people the content that they want streamlined to them without making them sit through other things that aren't as pertinent to them. So I think it was really smart. And yeah, Ranella and Meat Eater obviously did it right. I've said for a long time, I thought that's where, and I still do think that's where podcasts are going eventually, where eventually it gets big enough, there's enough eyeballs or earballs or whatever they are that are listening to these shows where these companies are going to start consolidating them, where there's going to be someone come in and say, hey, there's 7 fishing shows that people are listening to a lot. Let's go in and see if we can buy or acquire them. And then, in one voice, you have a lot more leverage for sponsors or to sell the streaming rights to a Spotify or something. So I think eventually that's where it's going. And I think it's smart that you guys kind of took that leap early and said, you know what, maybe we can get ahead of this a little bit and we can kind of do the network thing, which I think is cool.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, at least from where we're trying to take it in our brand direction. It's like it might divvy up the listenership in regards to, you might not see a lot on one show because it might be spread out within the others, because they, like you said, they might get dialed into one thing or the other. There's certainly people that listen to all of them. There's people that listen to 2, there's 3, there's people that pick and choose which one they want to listen to. But what it does is, with that niche is somebody that searches kayak fishing podcast and they come across it and they see that and they like Kayak Fishing Weekly. But then with that channel and things that it does under the network is it allows them to see, at least have some eyeballs on what else we do have. So it's one show bringing in a listener, but also has a potential to bring them in for the other shows. So all those different niches can attract outside people that we may have not have reached. Like say Lure Lab might not have reached a random kayak angler from the South that was looking for a kayak podcast. So like, oh man, I didn't even think about this. Like I can get 15 minutes at 6 a.m. on the way to the ramp on a Saturday, and I can listen about frogging for the day. So that's the idea of it. And we got some pretty big plans to expand that network in the different directions we're going to go. And that's all I can say about it right now, but it's going well for now.
Well, speaking of different directions we're going to go with this episode, we're going to go in a direction of kayak fishing tips. So I think I don't have a better friend probably to ask about this type of stuff. I mean, you are obviously a kayak guy at heart, a lot of tournaments, a lot of different places around the country. You've had different kayak rigs over the past couple of years. So I think this will be a cool conversation where we each basically brought 5 tips for kayak anglers, and we're going to alternate them and go back and forth and kind of talk a little bit about these. So without further ado, let's start with tip number 1. I'm going to let you go first. What's your first tip for serious anglers when it comes to kayak fishing?
So the first one I have, I didn't take this in the route of like setups or gear or anything like that for the most part. I more kind of looked at it as purpose. And the first one I have is it's burned in my brain is it's actually from John Cox, where it's like, don't let the boat define like where you fish. And that's exactly what I brought to this from a kayak side. Like, don't let the size of the water or anything like that define what you do from the kayak, because sure, kayak in its originality is something, skinny water and things. And that's what, that's amazing for. That's what it was originally designed for. But that doesn't mean you can't go take it out on the ocean. You can't go take it out on the Great Lakes. And I speak from that personally, where I get all the looks going out on Lake Erie, 4 miles offshore for smallmouth. And I get all the crooked necks running by me in the boats. They're like, how the hell is this plastic boat out here? But don't let it define it. If you want to go fish it, obviously, be smart about it, but get in stuff as small as you want and go fish stuff as big as you want. But don't let a certain body of water, or just be for the fact that you have a paddle kayak, define how you want to go fish.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to take that too, is to not be scared of the too big of circumstances, because sometimes I go the route of the reason I have a kayak is to get to where other guys can't get to, which is true. And that's half the battle that you're talking about. But the other half is don't be scared to go where they are going as well. Like, you're just as capable of going out and fishing that offshore brush pile as they are, but you have that unique ability to go farther up the creek, to go over log jams and stuff like that. So don't let it, I guess, define you either way is a cool way to look at that.
100%.
All right, everybody, we'll get back to the episode here in just a second, but first we are brought to you in part by Mossy Oak. Now, I know when you think Mossy Oak, you probably think camouflage, you probably think hunting season, and while it is true that Mossy Oak makes some of the best proprietary camouflage patterns in the outdoors industry, they also make some of the sharpest patterns for on-the-water clothing as well, with awesome patterns like hailstone, Arctic ice, high seas, and more. You can look and feel like a pro out there on the water with Mossy Oak fishing apparel. Between their long sleeve and their short sleeve tech shirts featuring their signature Hydroplex technology, built-in microfiber patches for cleaning your sunglasses, and UPF sun protection, to their fishing shorts and casual wear, they've got something for everybody. There's a reason why so many pros like Kevin Van Dam, Hank Parker, Gerald Swindle, Ott Defo, and more choose Mossy Oak. And you can too. All you have to do is go over to www.store.mossyoak.com and click fishing at the top of the homepage to get started. Again, that's www.store.mossyoak.com. Trust the best with Mossy Oak. So my first tip here, and what's interesting is I think for some of these I probably took them very different, which is good, because I think we're going to have 10 completely different, because full disclosure, we didn't run these by each other before we started this episode too. So we're going in completely blind here. My first tip, so I guess this is number 2 on our list, is going to be to take your weight distribution seriously in your kayak. I think one thing that I've learned over having, probably 4 or 5 different brands of kayaks now. I've had Ascend, Feel Free, Old Town, Hobie, a bunch of stuff over the years, and I've used people's Bonafides and, new canoes and that kind of stuff, is the weight distribution of that kayak is so important and pivotal to how it performs, how it maneuvers for your certain situations, where I used to be the guy that just threw everything in the back and it was all behind me. So my dead weight is right behind my seat. And then I keep wondering okay, well, why do I feel slow? Why Why do I feel like, I'm back heavy here and my tip keeps pointing up type of thing? You do have to space out your weight. So that's why a lot of these kayaks have a front hatch where you can put one of your batteries in the front hatch. That helped me a lot with this Hobie Outback that I have now. Actually upsized the battery that I was going to use for my electronics. It's a little bigger than I need, but it helps me balance out that front end of that kayak, because with the Hobie Outback, your back end is so almost level with the water anyway, where as soon as you put a motor or something on there, you're almost dipping below the water line coming in the back. So I really had to kind of think about that and say, okay, how can I kind of balance this out, and a bigger battery in the front help me? So I think that's something that a lot of people take for granted sometimes when you've got a 60, 70, 80 pound piece of plastic that you're in with a 150, 200 pound person, 300 pound person in it, depending on how big you are. It's like that weight distribution makes a big difference to how that kayak handles.
100%. Yeah. And I've seen the flip side where it's, I try to, being the big water guy, I put a little bit of weight up in front. But a lot of my weight, honestly, is actually focused in the back too. And again, this comes back to your point. Like, if you're going to have a decked out setup, like we're talking, you're going to have a motor, you're going to have electronics, things like that. If you're going to spend that money on that stuff, go take the time out to actually go see how your kayak sits in the water before you go out on your adventures. Like, this isn't just something you can just throw it in and go. Where I've seen it happen where a guy put a bow mount on one of his pro anglers and put 100 amp in the front hatch as well, and went out, and in the waves, you guys can only imagine what happened. He went under. So like, it's one of those things, just be smart about how you're doing things. That's one of the reasons why I won't do a bow mount on the pro angler, is I get in big enough water where it just doesn't make sense for me to do it. It's very important to look at the weight distribution. It's just like it is on the boat side.
I don't know. It's one of those things where I think sometimes people just think like, oh, if it's floats, it's good. Like, I'm floating, I'm good. I can paddle this thing around or do whatever. It's like, well, maybe you can. Maybe, you're still technically above the water. It's okay. But in terms of enjoyability or maneuverability, especially, dude, if you're paddling, like, that makes such a big difference of how heavy that front feels, how well it turns, how well it tracks. All that kind of stuff is so important, especially if you're a paddle guy. So yeah, I would say that's like my first tip that I took probably longer to learn than I'm proud to admit I did, which was how important that weight distribution is. So that's tip number 2. Bailey, I'm going to go back to you here. What's tip number 3 for us today?
So this one is a little bit more in depth, and it's a lot harder for the current folks, but honestly might be even more important. And that is, boat positioning is everything. Where there's times where, I am still at fault for this all the time, where I'm like, I'll be fishing and kind of just being lackadaisical or whatever. And I'll just be like, oh, I missed that pocket as I'm going down the bank. And I just take a cast behind me. And then you end up actually hooking a fish, not even preparing for it. And then you lose it because your boat positioning isn't correct.
Yeah.
So with that, like, it's, especially if you're in, I was just on a Susquehanna, where it's important. Like, if you're on a float, think about, like, are you going to float down the river and cast at that, stagnant water while you're still floating down? Or do you want to actually take 30 seconds, not even, to just get below it and then focus back up, so you're paddling against the current, and then cast up in the stagnant water? Where you think about current directions, you think about, whether you're fishing docks on a lake, lay downs, especially. That's another huge one that people don't really think too much about, where you can flip over that log, but why don't you get on the other side, point it down, and that way your exit for that fish is easier. So it's small things like that really are more just a time thing, and just take it's a little bit of an added effort, but the boat positioning is absolutely crucial in a kayak, because there's so many times where it's not like a boat where you can just turn around your body and be able to fight that fish from the back of the boat, whatever. This is one that, it can mean landing or not landing a fish.
Yeah, it takes thought before the cast, which a lot of times I think some people don't do. They just see something and they see it as like a heat map of like a 3 foot by 3 foot area, and they're like, I'm just going to cast over there. Well, it's like, well, yeah, you did half the battle, but then the other half is, what direction is your bait coming from? Are you going to be able to fight this fish effectively with whatever you're dealing with, wind, current, obstructions? You got a strainer tree coming up on the left that's going to get you if you don't get out of the way of it in time. Like, if you do hook a fish that you have to fight for 35 seconds, you're going to end up in that tree, that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's something that I think takes a lot more foresight than people think sometimes. And yeah, you might get lucky and you just cast over there and it's great and it works out okay. But the foresight where it's almost like, again, I'm not good at chess, but in chess, you have to like think about your next move before, you actually make your current move. It's kind of like, especially in current, but in situations where you're moving, it could be just a little wind that's pushing you around the lake too, and you're trying to fish this brush pile or something effectively. It's like you have to think about it before you do it. Yeah,
like another great example that really gets heavily overlooked is if you're out in a lake and it's windy and you're fishing grass, say you're flipping milfoil piles. If you're getting pushed pretty good and you're going against the wind and it's 2 miles per hour, you're not gonna be able to flip efficiently. It's going to suck, but go against that wind, pedal, paddle, motor, whatever, and flip into it. Because also then you look over is the wind driven current. You'll see that grass start to lay a certain way. That's going to force the fish to face a certain way. So you want to flip against that. That's a whole other thing. And then to coincide with this, I guess this could be another one, but we'll just slide it in there as like a part 2 of this one is when people are fighting that fish, rod angle. Rod angle is a huge one too. I see, and I'm a culprit of it. I do it every now and then, but I've been trying so hard for the past couple of years to, like when I'm fighting a fish, I see too many people that because of their boat positioning and their boat going another way when they're fighting a fish, that they'll swap the angle that they're fighting that fish because of their boat going a certain way. And they lose them and they wonder why they lose them. And that's exactly that, where it's, if you can, especially if you have a stable enough kayak, stand up and fight that fish as you would be if you're standing on solid ground, where it's, cause then all those rod swaps just because your boat's going a certain way is going to cause you to lose fish, if that makes any sense for people. But that's the biggest thing that drives me up a wall, especially when I do it. Oh my, I want to punch myself in the face, where it's like the best thing you can do if you got a fish that is running to your right, say you're fighting it, and instinctually it causes you to, with your kayak going to the left, it causes you to want to swap. That way your kayak's going the right way. Stand up if you can and just let that fish do its thing, because it will turn back around. But that's one thing I think I added on top of the boat positioning thing that is such a big one that can help people. Yeah, it's a good point. Like, watch any tournament where guys are fighting fish at the front of the boat. They're going over the trolling motor 3 or 4 times. It's not because they're moving the fish that direction. It's because the fish is changing and going right and left and right and left. Like, that's going to happen in a kayak too. You don't need to force that fish to overcorrect and go the way that you want. My issue sometimes is I do swap too many times because I want to land the fish. I guess it would be on the right side of my kayak. That's where I feel comfortable landing a fish. So I will swap those, and I've lost some fish sometimes where I've tried to force it to move one final time to the right so that I can get that right side landing versus the left side landing. I just rather land it on my right. But yeah, it's a good point. Is like, let the fish determine where it wants to go for the most part, except for maybe the very end where you want to kind of make that move and land that fish. Yeah. And when doing that too, it allows you, if you can just keep with him a little bit, it can allow you, one, to judge how well it's hooked. And two, depending on the fish, like if it's not going too crazy, jumping everywhere, what you can do is have it, like, say if you want it to land on the right side of your boat and you're on the left side, if it's coming at a decent pace, but it's honestly just a steady swimming motion. I mean, you know exactly what I'm talking about here, where you can steadily, gradually turn it around. It's not don't do the whipping motion that people do. That's how you lose them. You can steadily move them, especially if you know you got them hooked. Just move them around a little bit. Because you can feel if that fish is going to the outside or the inside of that turn, and you just go with it. Don't try and force it to the opposite version of that. Just, if I can feel it going, if it's on my left side going under my kayak, well, okay, then I can make a wide swoop around left and over versus trying to 180 switch it back and forth. So yeah, it's a good point. That kind of takes us to tip number 4 here. We're sort of related here a little bit, but I think this is kind of a different nuance to it. Is my 4th tip is the anchor position, I think anyway, and I can be argued with this, so I understand that there's probably different schools of thought here. I think there's no reason to not have the anchor position of your kayak, if you have an anchor system of some sort, be in the front of your kayak. I can't think of a situation. I used to have one of those anchor trolleys on the side where you can go back and forth and you can anchor from the front or the back or whatever. I can't think of a situation where an anchor point at the front of my kayak would not be sufficient, especially in a kayak that you can stand in and you can turn around in. Because if you're in a lake and you're in more of a swirling wind situation or something, you should be standing up in that kayak and fishing the direction you want anyway. So I can stand and fish directly behind my kayak and I'm fine. I can fish off to the side. I can do whatever, but especially because we live in current. So it's like in current situations, I always want my anchor point in the direct middle front of my kayak, no questions asked. Because if I get anchored off to the side, and this is a problem I had when I had an anchor trolley type deal, was if you anchor to the side, that's where you flip.
If you get sideways in a current situation, that's when bad things happen every single time. If you can face forward, if I drop an anchor and it's at the front of my kayak, I know every single time I am faced directly into the current, which one is good because I'm not going to flip. Two, it's good for just the natural direction that you want to be casting anyway. You want to be casting up current, bringing a bait down current because that's more natural. And you go, like you were talking about earlier, if I see an eddy or something that I want to hit really bad, okay, I'll swing around, I'll go to the end of that current seam, I'll anchor right there, it'll whip my kayak around, and I'll face that eddy straight up so I can cast past the eddy, let the bait come down the current seam, and I can work it into the eddy if I want. So front position in my kayak, even if I'm not in current and I'm just in wind, I think makes life so much easier, where there's not really a situation I can think of anyway where I would be like completely out of the game and be like, darn it, I need to be anchored in the very back of my kayak. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but I do.
No, I completely agree. And I've seen some people current wise that have taken like the power pole stuff and rigged it on the front, and they will actually cut the shaft so that, like, especially when you're in shallow current or shallow water, you don't need the giant freaking power pole that stands 8 feet. I'm still, it blows my mind that we haven't come up with like a Talon concept for kayaks. If there's, the
somebody
Boondocks
out there,
of the world's,
please do it.
Somebody make one, because that thing stands up 8 feet. So I've seen people that have chopped them in half. That way they can use it on the front and not have to worry about bringing their rod over when they're fighting a fish. And I've seen that be really successful. I've seen guys do it with the, what's the anchor, the giant ball that some people use.
Da bomb.
Something. Yeah. I'm trying to remember what the exact rigging thing is for it, but
like a downrigger or something. What are you talking about?
I think you have it right. I'm trying to remember the exact name.
The people that make the kayak anchor, it looks like a bomb. It's just a circle.
Yeah.
And then they've got the, what do they call, anchor wizard up at the front.
Yes, thank you.
Deploys it. Yeah.
That was it. You can tell I've never used one before, but I see them, and like, it actually is pretty advantageous, especially if you're in deeper water. I think on the front makes total sense. The only time I've seen it make sense from the back, but this is a simple fix. As I was frogging yesterday in a lake, a little bit of wind, I had this mat field in front of me, and I wanted to stay off the field so I can cast into it. Whereas if I had it in the back, I could anchor down. That way, like if I'm the front, I'm casting and my rods are standing up behind me, but that's simple as literally laying my rods down because Hobie's got the horizontal. So like as simple as that, and you're fine. But yeah, I think I'm with you. I'm with you on that train of thought.
So then that takes us to tip number 5 here. We're back to you.
So this one will be interesting. This is actually kind of relatively gear related, but also thought process, and might poke some certain brands, but
we're here for it.
There's no such thing as a kayak rod. I think that's total BS. I think it's all a marketing thing, just like the forward facing rods. But it is, in my personal opinion, you don't need a kayak specific rod. If you like throwing a Chapo on a 7-foot medium heavy or whatever, throw it on a 7-foot medium heavy. If you like me, you like punching with a 711 extra heavy, don't go down to a 7.4 because they tell you shorter rods are better for kayaks. That's a bunch of crap. I've caught them punching, sitting down with a 711 extra heavy. You'll be just fine. Use what's good for the technique. Use what you like, and you'll be just fine.
So this is absolutely hilarious, because my last tip, I'm going to go ahead and bring it in now, was, yes, I agree that there's no such thing as a kayak specific rod. Those are those ones where like they keep trying to sell you these rods that have like absolutely no butt section on them. Everybody knows the rods we're talking about, but but it's just like, what is this? Like, this doesn't make sense. It doesn't feel good to me. That seems like more of a gimmick to me. What I will, and I kind of have fallen into the trap of a little bit lately, is a shorter rod, or I guess the shortest rod for the technique that still makes sense in the kayak. Because what I found is like, I have 7.4, 7.6, 7.11, whatever rods. It makes it harder to land that fish for me, at least. It definitely does, versus like a 7-foot rod. So a good example, it's not a spoiler alert, but by the time this episode comes out, we'll have talked about it. We're doing a gear review on the rod that I'm using right now for glide baits, and actually brought it up when we went to New York. So I had that rod with me. It's a 7-foot extra heavy, moderate Megabass P5 destroyer. And what I learned is like, I used to have the 7-11 swim bait rods and stuff like that. And at least in the kayak now with a boat or whatever, you need to make giant bomb casts or whatever. Yeah, the long rod and everything makes sense. For me, the shorter rod for certain techniques in a kayak makes more sense to me because, one, I'm a short guy. I'm on a short, small, stubby boat. So like if I'm working something at that angle, like if it's a spook or like a glide bait or something where I have that sort of downward angle, I just physically need a shorter rod anyway, so I'm not slapping the water or slapping the tip of my kayak or whatever. But two, it's helped me land more fish, I think, because I've gotten away from that 7.5, 7.7, 7.11 rod, that type of thing. So yeah, I think the kayak specific rods are kind of a load of crap in terms of, oh, this has a, normally the butt section is, 11 inches long and this one's 5 inches long and that's supposed to help you. I don't believe that at all. But as far as maybe at least looking at a slightly shorter rod for the technique than you're used to in a giant boat or in a giant like bomb casting off the bank technique, it's helped me a little bit for certain things, is to shorten my rod a little bit.
Yeah, and there's a caveat to that where it's situation based. If you're going to adjust your rod, adjust it based on a situation. Like if you're a Drew Gregory and you're going back in a creek where you can touch the sides with your arms type of deal, don't be throwing a 7-11 type of deal, because chances are it's not going to be, you're going to be hooking the sides of the bank, where that's where, there's times where I've fished and I'm going, there's a lake by me that has a bunch of these overhanging trees where if you slide into them, it's almost impossible to get cast under them from the outside, where I slide through the tree and then I ride the bank under the trees, where it's anything over a 7.5, you're not going to be able to use. So I go down to like a 6.5 for a spinnerbait, or a 7 foot is about as big as I go into that kind of stuff. So adjust for your situation. Don't adjust just because it says it's a kayak rod. Yeah,
exactly. I think it's a good way to make the difference too, is there's going to be people that are going to say, you always have to throw a frog on a 7.4 extra heavy, fast rod. It's like, maybe in a perfect scenario where you have all the room in the world and everything, but in a kayak, you like you said, you're in different situations. Don't think that there's just this is the rod I have to use for this certain technique all the time, because you get yourself in unique situations in a kayak that are a little different than, you have a giant boat or you're out in the middle of the lake or something. So yeah, I think it's a good point to make there too. And that's kind of was my last tip. So we'll go ahead and put that one in there, was at least don't be scared of shorter rods than you've always been told for the technique, because there are going to be situations in a kayak where you are going to want to go shorter. All right, everybody, we'll get back to the episode here in just a second, but first we are brought to you in part by Dakota Lithium batteries. And not only is the mailbag powered by Dakota Lithium, but this entire podcast is powered by Dakota Lithium. My kayak motor is powered by Dakota Lithium. My electronics are powered by Dakota Lithium. There's only one battery that I trust with my precious time, my safety, and my success out there on the water. That iconic blue battery with the red top. You know it from a mile away. They're just the best in the business. That's because Dakota Lithium batteries are twice the power of traditional batteries at half the weight. They charge up to 5 times faster. They last up to 4 times longer. They have 100% US-based customer support, and they come with a whopping 11-year warranty on all of their batteries standard. So whether you need a 10 amp hour or a 100 amp hour, whether you need 12 volt, 24 volt, 36 volt, the boys at Dakota Lithium have you covered. And because you listen to Tackle Talk, you can use code TACKLETALK5 to save 5% off your entire purchase. That helps them know that we sent you, and it saves you money on your next battery purchase. Again, that's code TACKLETALK5 over at www.dakotalithium.com, the official lithium battery of Bassmaster. All right, I'm going to count that as my next one because I jumped ahead a little bit on that one. So we are back to you.
So I'm going to go with this one. This can apply universally to fishing, but especially in the kayak side where it's, we're already stealthy as it is, regards to we don't have a big motor, that sort of thing. And some people obviously have motors, things like that. But stealth is your friend as a kayak. That's one thing that, you've noticed. I've noticed my boat buddies that get into a kayak, they notice that they can get more close up on fish and not spook them type of deal. Use that to your advantage. And where I'm going with this is I've noticed guys that get up shallow, they're looking for spawning fish or whatever. They're sight fishing, anything like that. And they're slamming paddles down. They're making a whole bunch of ruckus in their kayak. And you will not believe how much more fish that you will run into if you try and focus on the small little things that you don't even think about, like having a water bottle and throwing it back on the deck of your kayak. Where you're in that plastic boat, it echoes a lot louder than you would in a normal boat. And it makes a lot of noise. So that's one thing I've noticed when I go up dirt shallow and I'm trying to catch fish. I turn my electronics off if I even have them on the boat to begin with. And it's like, if I'm using a paddle, I'm going very, very slowly at putting that paddle back down into a grip. Get like one of those roto grip things as well. That's a huge one, because if you're tipping, your paddle's rocking back and forth, it's making constant noise. Be calculated with your movements, and you'll be surprised how many more bites that you'll run into, especially close quarters. Where I've had times where this will come full circle too, that I've literally have seen fish at a rod's length from me that has no idea that I'm there in the kayak floating past it, and I can pitch to it and catch it. Granted, I'm in the north, so my fish are a lot dumber than the south, but you'd be surprised. And one thing I noticed too, and this was actually, I'm trying to remember the guy that actually gave me this tip, but he's an incredible sight fisherman from the south and much better than me, so I'll take it as fact, is he wears, like, if it's going to be sunny outside and he's going to be dirt shallow fishing for him, he wears a baby blue t-shirt. And that, I thought, was like, you think about it, you're like, huh. But if you go underwater and you look at that, like, I've literally gone and tried this where I will have, like, my wife and I go fishing, I'll go underwater and look up and see what I can see. Because it's a whole different perspective when you can get think about, like, what we see looking down is completely different than what the fish sees looking up.
Right.
And if you can blend in with the sky, that's less of you that you have to worry about moving above the water and them seeing you. All you got to worry about then is your shadow from the kayak. And you'd be surprised at small things like that, especially for the shallow water guys, that make a big difference. Obviously, if you're in muddy water, that doesn't matter much, but that's a little clear water tip, if you will.
Well, yeah. And it blows my mind where it's like, you picked a kayak. One of the reasons you pick a kayak, obviously, like you said, is stealth. I can do things in a kayak that the guy with a bass cat and a giant trolling motor on the front can't do. He can't sneak up on fish like I can. Mm-hmm. So then it makes absolutely no sense when you get in these shallow water situations, you see these guys just, like, still pedaling and knocking things around. And, like on a Hobie, for instance, like, they're fluttering that thing and they're letting it freaking smack the top of it as they're going through. And it's like, what are you doing? Like, get your paddle out. Paddle very ever so slowly, like you're trying to be stealthy. Turn your motor off, pull your motor up, or if it's too late, don't pull your motor up and make this giant chunk as, like, you raise your NK 180 or whatever out of the water. Like, try and be stealthy. That's the whole point of kayak fishing. And it's not as simple as just like, okay, don't yell, don't have, giant sounds above the water. It's like, don't drop your pliers, stuff like that, because as something hard, as something hard hits hard plastic, which is touching the water, like, that transfer of that sound is so much more noticeable underwater. Like, do anything underwater. Drop a penny underwater and let it hit the ground. Do anything where there's two hard things hitting each other underwater, and it just travels like crazy. So little stuff like that, I would almost make the argument that if you drop a penny in your kayak, that's way more intrusive to that fish than you talking above the surface.
100%. I completely agree. And to that extent, like, I've seen this on the boat side too, where one thing I noticed with Scott Martin and some other guys is you watch them in their videos and watch how they drop the trolling motor. They very, very, very slow. This applies to even guys that are offshore. This kind of stuff that I apply there too. And that's why sometimes, like, honestly, when there's a lot of boat traffic, I don't mind it, because it can echo or it can cancel some of that out. You don't have to worry about it. But like, just if you think about the small things like that, you'll be surprised how many more bites you'll run into. It might only be a couple bites a day, but a couple bites that could be the 5-pounder you caught that day that you wouldn't have, because those old fish are old for a reason. And you'd be impressed how far they can hear or they can see you.
Yeah, I don't think it's the boat in general that spooks a lot of fish. Like, I think they're used to it by now. It just looks like anything else floating on top of the water. It could be a big log, could be whatever. I don't think that's necessarily what really bugs them. Like you said, it's that sudden something, sudden sound, sudden deployment of a trolling motor, sudden turn on or off of the outboard. I think that kind of stuff. Turning on and off your electronics. I'm a big guy that believes that there is absolutely no way in the world that doesn't affect fish. If you've ever held, like, an ice transducer up to your head and it's like, that's going through the water even louder than it is above the surface. Like, they know it's there. It's just a matter of what does it do to them, or do they care, or is there enough stuff around that it doesn't really bug them, or they're hungry enough or feeding enough that it's not deterring them. But stuff like that, like turning on and off your electronics, I think does a lot too. I'm one of those people, I believe if I'm going to go out there, I'm going to fish like an offshore piece. I'm either rolling up to it with everything that I'm going to have on already on, or I've got everything already off. I'm not going to go up there and switch settings or switch from side to down or whatever and changing what's going on under that water. Like, I want it to be seamless from the time I roll up till the time I leave.
Yeah, completely agree on that. You can take that down a whole rabbit hole of like looking at nature's, cover, where it's like if you see a fish that you want to go catch, say it's spawning, or it's on a log and it's completely sunny out, and you don't want to. Sometimes your shadow can cast, like especially spawners, they freak out when they see shadows.
Yeah.
If you see, like, if it's spawning and there's an overhang to the left that provides a shadow, go around that fish, come to the side, and use the already natural shadow to disguise your shadow. You'd be surprised. The small things like that can get you more bites.
Yeah, I've seen bedfish before where like I've been able to go right above them, but my shadow's cast far away and they don't care about my kayak going above them. But if I do roll up to them and the shadow actually hits their bed, like you said, that's when they freak out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just crazy.
Well, that's a good tip too. So that takes us to tip number 8 here. This is going to be a really, again, gear techie sort of specialized tip here, but I'm going to put it out there anyway because it's one of the better things I think that I learned to do when I was rigging my kayak the last time. So I put a motor on my kayak for the first time on this Outback that I have right now. And one of the best things that I did was buy like a $9 piece of thin rubber, like rubber mat. I bought it off Amazon, and I put it between my kayak and the motor mount, so that there's a buffer in between those two pieces of hard, like plastic and metal. And that way you reduce the vibration, you reduce anything that could be happening because of that motor on your kayak. And then again, it makes it, one, smoother for you, but two, again, I think as we're talking about, like, decreasing your visibility or feeling the presence or whatever in the water. Without that piece of rubber, there's definitely a lot more vibration on the kayak, even at low speeds when I'm turning that motor prop down there. Mm-hmm. So I think things like that, it doesn't necessarily have to be that, but just things you can do to like dampen the vibration of your kayak, I think would help. So some people might take that as like marine mat or something like that too, or you want to put that down on your kayak. So again, if you do drop your pliers or something, it muffles it. That kind of stuff helps a lot. And it's something that I think people just look at as a convenience. They look at that as, oh, great, right? My foot doesn't slip as easy when I'm barefoot and it's wet or something. It's like, no, there's actual benefits to having either rubber or some sort of mat piece anywhere that could dampen sound or vibration on your kayak. And that was a $9 fix for me that just made my experience with that whole motor bracket and having a motor on it so much better.
Yeah, I completely. So this is the first year I've ran the Hobie Marine Mat on my Pro Angler, and the amount of, like, I've purposely did it with the guy Ryan Kennedy at Morgan Marine. He rigs everything for me every year. I call him the Hobie Mad Scientist. And like, we were talking about that, and he's like, yeah, it's a lot quieter too. And I'm like, what do you mean? At first I'm like, what do you mean quieter? And he's like, listen to this. So he had two Hobies next to each other, mine with the Marine Mat and one that was without it. And he dropped a tungsten weight on the one without it and dropped tungsten weight on one with mine. The sound difference is incredible just from that standpoint. So it's that stuff, the little things like that, it just goes right over your head, but it makes a big difference.
Yeah, and it was just something where I was frustrated when I put that motor mount on the first time, and I was like, it's not the end of the world, but there's definitely some vibration back there that's just bugging me. I was like, there's got to be some way to do it. All it takes is, again, $9, a piece of rubber, drill 4 holes in it, the same spots where the actual pins go through to attach the kayak, and your problem's solved. So stuff like that, I think, dampening vibration, dampening sound, there's some cheap ways to do it. There's some expensive ways to do it, however you want to figure that out, but that was a big thing that definitely helped me on this rig that I just did, that I don't really see a whole lot of people talking about, but it's like dampening that connection between motor mount and kayak.
I'm going to have to try that. I haven't do that on mine. I'm going to have to try that. I just have the straight bracket mount for my Newport, and then straight to the Newport bracket.
Dude, and it's nice. I'll send you the link on Amazon of the one I bought.
Please do.
It was like $9. Yeah.
Please do. I mean, it's the Newport smooth as hell to begin with, but the problem is when you get in grass for any motor, it starts and it shakes your kayak and you're just getting like a massage on your chair. But like you get some sort of grass on it, it does that. But that makes a world of difference.
Yeah, I don't even get like the really vibration stuff when I bottom out, because we're in shallow rivers and stuff. When you're dragging that thing back there, it used to be just nails on a chalkboard in terms of that motor or that rock guard hitting the bottom that then, hits where the bracket hits the kayak and get that vibration kind of going back and forth. It's helped even with that.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So that is my next one. Bailey, I think we're at your last tip. This should be number 9 for us, I think. Yeah,
last one. I mean, it's going to sound kind of cliche. And for the guys that maybe that, they're into kayak fishing just because they take they grab $1,000 kayak and they fish their local lake and they fish the same spot every day. This might not necessarily apply to you. But for somebody like we're talking about, if they're serious about kayak fishing and learning and improving, don't be afraid to go and try something completely brand new. And when I say about that, yes, it's one, adventure wise, I think just the intrinsic feeling of fishing and exploring. But two, what that does is it forces you in different situations, which allows you to be more comfortable in your kayak, which over the long run helps you just one, maneuverability wise, be comfortable in certain situations. When things get nasty, weather wise, it allows you to be more comfortable and feel at least more safe to like get back to the ramp type of deal. Like the more you put yourself in different situations, the better you're going to be, not just kayak fishing wise, but in the kayak itself. So from a safety standpoint, that is the one thing where it's like, for me, I've been called a lunatic, which, for the most part I am, in regards to, I'll go out in big water, even when the wind's ripping type of deal. And, I've spent, we had a tournament on Oneida up here in New York, which can get pretty big with the wind. And I stayed out all day long in 3 to 4 footers in a kayak. And that's just because I forced myself in situations like that outside of just a tournament to make myself feel comfortable. So that's the extreme level of forcing yourself in conditions. But like, if you're a guy that goes out in a lake, go to a local creek or a river and maneuver stuff like that. Force yourself in different positions, because you'd be impressed with, like, you're going to go sit down in your kayak all day and you were going to fish from there. But then you go in a creek and you think about standing up in your kayak in moving water, things like that. It helps you be more comfortable in your environment, which over the long run just helps you be a better kayak angler, and probably makes you feel a lot better when you're out there too.
Yeah, it's a good point too, where it's like, you're never going to be a great driver of a car by just going up and down your driveway. Like, you have to go other places. You got to go on the highway. You got to go on back roads. You got to go all these places to expose yourself to these different types of situations you could be in, which makes you a more well-rounded driver. A kayak is the exact same thing. Like, if you're just going to the same pond every day, all day for 20 years, like, if that's what you want to do, that's fine, but that's not going to help make you a more well-rounded kayak angler. You have to expose yourself to those different elements and stuff. And I think you hit it right on the head. Like, me exposing myself to bigger water, even though I don't normally fish bigger water, has helped me maneuver my kayaks more safely in the smaller water than I'm usually in. Because just by comparison, you're like, one, you feel more confident because you're like, dude, I've been in way worse than this. Like, this is not as bad as I used to think it was. I saw how bad things can get, or how tricky things can get, or how on my feet I need to be all the time to make sure that I'm not tipping or getting in bad situations. And then it makes those everyday situations a breeze, and you don't worry so much about maneuverability or safety as much as you do going out and fishing, because it's just second nature on how you're maneuvering that kayak, how you're hitting that fast riffle and avoiding the big boulder that's 2 foot down that you have to get to the right of really quickly. Like, that kind of stuff. It just becomes second nature, and what way I need to take this wave to make sure that I'm okay, or what way I need to take this tree that's coming up on the right in really fast current. I need to get around it. How do I get around it? I used to panic. Now I don't panic because it's easy. So that kind of stuff. I think that's a really good point. Also, a kayak is freedom. So don't just go to the same places all day long, because I get in that rut where I'm like, dude, I get a day off. I want to go to this lake that I know around here because I know I'll smoke them, and I know that lake like the back of my hand. No, I should go other places and experience other areas, because that's the whole point of having a kayak, is you have the freedom to go almost everywhere. So I think that's definitely not lost on me. Something that I need to work on a lot more too is stepping out of my comfort zone and not just going to my same 4, 5, 6 spots. Go explore, because that's the coolest part of a kayak.
It's the best part. It's like up here in New York, we have the Adirondacks. It's my absolute favorite place. That and the Susky, just because you can go there countless times and it's brand new every single time. There's new fisheries. For a great example, I have a buddy out in Minnesota, and I'll call him out. I won't put his name in here just to save him some embarrassment, but I tease him. He's a great friend. He's out in Minnesota. He fishes like Minnetonka and stuff. And he goes, man, I need to go find some new fisheries. And I just stare at him blankly, and I'm like, you're in Minnesota. Like, what are you doing?
10,000 lakes within a mile of you.
Get out and go explore. Don't be afraid to go to places that don't have a nice boat ramp. Like, there's method. You have wheels. You have different ways.
That's the point of a kayak, is go to the places that don't have a nice boat ramp.
Exactly.
Those are the best places.
That's the best. Yeah, those are the best places. But yeah, I mean, outside of that too, to add on to the learning aspect, outside of like your page, there's a couple great ones. But like Jeff Little, it's called The Little Things on YouTube. He has a lot of really good educational kayak content out there. That's like, for if you're fishing cold water, if you fall in? Like, what are the gear you need? How should you operate if you do fall in? Things like that. How to maneuver big water. Like he's gone out on Lake Erie with giant waves with some of the, I'm trying to remember his name, out of Erie, PA. But like they go out and he forced himself.
Chuck, is that who you're talking about?
Yeah, Chuck. I can't remember his last name.
Earls.
Yes, there you go. That's it. Erie guide hammer. But Jeff will go and put all that educational content out on his channel. So that is something I encourage people to go check out too. If you want to see some maneuverability things, like exactly what we're just talking about, like how to have a rigged kayak and get it over a log. Like Jeff's got pretty much all of it.
Yeah. When you should need a dry suit and stuff like that. Stuff that
exactly.
I should take the advice of that I selfishly don't, and get myself in situations that I shouldn't. 2 winters ago, I fell in the river in like, I don't know what it was, 37-degree water with waders on that filled up with water as I fell in. I'm like, I probably should have listened to Jeff and Chuck and all these videos I've watched of just buy a dry suit, dude. But no, instead I like, my teeth are chattering for 2 hours as I try and get back home. Like,
you just get the spirit of Jeff up in like a TV show. It's like, you chose poorly.
Yes, he comes over your shoulder. I told you.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. Well, that brings us to our last tip here. This is going to be, again, more on like the kayak gear side of things, because I think if there's anything that's worthy of protection on your kayak that you should take seriously, it's the keel. Keel protection is so underrated in a kayak, and that's where your investment fails. That's where if you're spending $300 on a kayak, you're spending $3,000 on a kayak. That is single-handedly the most important part of that kayak that keeps your kayak afloat above all things. So protect your keel. So it could be something as simple as like on this Outback I have now, I bought one of those, whatever they are, the Burley Pro bumper bros or whatever on the front. That's great because I can go full speed into a rock wall or something that I want and beach my kayak, and I don't have to worry about scraping the bottom of my kayak, putting a hole in it, and now I've got to plastic weld it and stuff. I've gone down that road with 2 or 3 kayaks where I've just absolutely obliterated the bottom. And with this kayak, I was like, I'm going to take the time to protect the bottom of my kayak so that that's one less thing I have to worry about. A keel guard is obviously a great thing. They make keel tape now that you can literally just flip your kayak upside down, adhere it to it, and you're good to go. And it's going to buy you years and years more of abuse on that kayak because you're the same way I am. We buy a kayak to abuse it. We don't buy a kayak to like, nicely trailer it every day at my private lake and then, that's all it does. It's like, no, dude, I'm dragging this thing on rocks and pavement and going over dams and that kind of stuff. So it's going to get the tar beat out of it on the bottom. I just want to protect it. So that type of stuff, it could be, something as simple as obviously just not dragging your kayak too helps a little bit, but I'm not good about that either. But yeah, just something simple to make sure that you are protecting the middle of your kayak, the front of your kayak, the back of your kayak, so that that investment lasts you a long time and you don't have to worry about situations. I got in a couple years ago. We were maybe, a mile into a 7-mile float and my kayak starts sinking. And I was like, oh no. And I was with Ryan at the time and we had to basically, it was the sketchiest day probably ever, where trying to get whatever it is, 5 miles with a hole probably this big in my kayak at the bottom. And every 3-4 minutes we would have to stop and I would have to dump out the inside of my kayak, which was completely full to the top with water. So don't put yourself in that situation. Just make sure you're protecting the bottom of your kayak.
Yeah, I've been there before. That's a tough one.
It sucks.
Yeah, it's the worst feeling when you lean to one side and all you hear is water in the hole and you're like, uh-oh.
I'm in trouble.
Yeah, I'm in danger.
Do you do anything to protect your keel or you just try and
I have that Burley Pro on the nose as well. I have that, and then I gradually just try to check the bottom of it. I try not to drag it as much. I definitely do, especially just up boat ramps, because now as of late, like this year especially, I've gotten really good at just beaching it on the ramp or somewhere near, and I back my truck down and I throw the whole setup in the back and then drive off. That way it's quick, easy, I'm out of the way, because there's nothing that pisses people off more than a kayak that's on a boat ramp.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Even though where it's like, dude, some of these people, it's like, my kayak costs more than your boat.
Yeah.
Around here, some dude in a pond prowler is getting mad because I take 30 seconds to load or unload my kayak. I'm like, dude, we're the same. What are you talking about?
Well, and then they go and take 5 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. First time they've ever launched.
Yeah. Yeah. But that Burley Pro thing, that thing's legit, man. I've had it on the past 3 boats, and that saves the front end because you take that off. If you do, like I had one come off. And when I went and inspected and everything, it's like the nose is brand new, and then the rest of the bottom of the kayak is just it's abused.
But dude, you can, again, we talk about like things you can get on Amazon. You can go on Amazon and buy Kydex, which is what that stuff is made out of. It's the stuff people make like gun holsters and stuff out of too. You can go buy squares of Kydex. And if you wanted to, not only could you just do the front of your kayak and like where the Burley Pro goes, you could do the whole bottom of the kayak if you wanted. You just flip your kayak over, put the Kydex on, get a heat gun. It'll mold to it, and then you just use some sort of adhesion. So it could be flex tape or, spray adhesion or whatever, and you just smack it to the bottom. Like little stuff like that. Again, it doesn't have to be that expensive. The Burley Pro is expensive. It's the one gripe I kind of had with it was like, for what it is, why does it cost this, whatever it is, 40, 50 bucks? I could make this for $9, but whatever. So you don't have to spend a ton of money to protect your keel. It could be as simple as some $9 Kydex and some flex tape, like just something to put on the bottom of there to protect it a little bit.
100%. Yeah, definitely worth it.
Well, hopefully that helps some people there. Hopefully out of those 10, people found something that applies to them. That would be the goal, obviously. But Bailey, thank you so much for stopping by. Obviously, that was, I think, a great discussion for people that are interested in the kayak game and some things that over the past 3, 4, 5 years, I think we've learned that make a big difference that might not be the giant things that are like found on the tag of the kayak as you're buying your first kayak or buying your next kayak that are still important. So before we let you go, Bailey, can you give us the shout out of where folks can find you and keep up with not just Serious Angler, but Serious Angler, Be the Fish, your tournament stuff? Where can folks keep up with Bailey Eigbrett?
Yeah, if you want to learn what not to do, so you can find.
They already watch my stuff. It's, they're looking for what to do.
Here's your top 10 tips on what not to do with the kayak. YouTube and all the podcast app stuff for Serious Angler, whether you're exactly where you're finding Tackle Talk is where you can find Serious Angler. Just plug in Serious Angler and chances are you can find our ugly mugs on there. And then my personal stuff, man, I'm on just Bailey Eigbrett on every social media platform. But if you just go on YouTube, Be the Fish, that's where I put up all of my fishing adventures, all that tournament content, things like that. And you can see all the success, but also a lot of failure and heartbreak. And if you enjoy watching that, there's a lot of it on my channel. So you can tune it into it there.
Well, thanks again, buddy. I appreciate you stopping by. Ladies and gentlemen, it's the one and only Mr. Bailey Eigbrett. Bailey, thank you, man.
Appreciate you, man.
All right, everybody, that's our episode today. Thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you, Bailey, for stopping by. Again, go check him out. It's Serious Angler on your favorite podcast platform. Find him on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. Go give Bailey's personal channels a follow. His YouTube is called Be the Fish, B-E the Fish. Just search Bailey Eigbrett on Instagram or Facebook. You'll find him there too. He's definitely worth a follow on all platforms. But other than that, once again, we owe a big thank you to each and every one of you that listened to today's episode. You guys are the absolute best. As always, you can go find us on our website, tackletalkpodcast.com. There, you can submit a mailbag question, you can check out our store, or you can just browse past episodes. Find us on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, all at Tackle Talk Podcast. And we'll see you right back here next Tuesday for another brand new episode of Tackle Talk.